This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. All right, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This episode 23, Modern Gaming Culture. This episode, I want to start unpacking what I refer to, what I consider the times we living in, which is an internet dark age, and really start to unpack sort of what I mean by that, right? The characteristics of it, etc., and really sort of shed light on sort of what happened, right, with the internet, right? Which a lot of people, who participate in gaming, right, may not be privy to, right, just because of circumstances, right, preceding, right. And so um, I wanted to get right into it, because it's a really you know, um, very difficult topic to really understand, and so um, you know, uh, let's just get right into it, right. So with kind of how AI has developed, right? Um, you know, for most people, right, who um, use the internet, right, frequently, right, um, it's something where generally, depending on demographics, right, um, you may not even notice, how algorithms have really changed, right, or how they differ from, for example, 15 years ago, right, and so um, for most people, they just use the internet and, generally if something happens, right, generally things, bounce back to normal, you know, in a very reasonable time, right? But for some people who have had their algorithms personalized, right, for whatever they do, right, with something like, for example, the internet censorship wave, right, as I call it, that occurred in the mid to late 2010s, right? That really, what we call gutted, right? The quality of material that we receive from the internet, right? And so, this is something that we notice, um, very deeply, right? Because, especially when you are becoming accustomed, right, to a type of content that you receive, right? And then suddenly somebody decides, right, that you can't receive that content anymore, right? Um, you know, that can be very disheartening, right? Um, which is kind of what the first topic I want to talk about is, right? And I'm doing this off the cuff, I have a lot of notes prepared for this. Um, but in terms of visual aids and all that stuff, it's not gonna be something I'm really gonna provide for this episode, which is gonna probably stretch into quite a few episodes. And so I'm just gonna do the best I can to sort of introduce a lot of these topics. But anyways, um, yeah, and so because with the internet censorship wave, um, you know, you basically made it very difficult for you to receive a lot of material, right? That you were receiving from the internet, right? Because a lot of it was being put into, you know, um, parts of the internet which are not indexed by search engines, which means that basically you can't access them through search engines, right? Which constitutes, up towards um, 85 to 90%, right, of um, the material you can't receive through search engines, right? People feel like somehow like search engines, right, are some like holy fountain, right? And that's couldn't be further away from the truth, right? You know, 87 to 90% of and probably upwards of 92 to 93% of the internet cannot be accessed through search engines, right? So it's something where you know um when basically tech giants are telling you that um we don't agree with the stance that you present on your content on our platform, so you basically cannot have it there, right? Especially when it's a very encouraging part of your platform, I mean of your algorithm, which is what I want to talk about, right? um you know with the internet, right, in the mid 2010s to late 2010s, right, it did become really a holy fountain where essentially, you were able to basically compartmentalize, material that you wanted, material you didn't want, material you're looking for, material that, you wanted to avoid, right? You know, memorizing landmarks, right? Like, if you frequently visit a shopping mall, large shopping mall, right? For example, like we have Yorkdale in Toronto, right? Or Square One in Scarborough. Um, you know, um, Similar to, oh, I know where this store is, so okay, I know where I am in the mall, right? It was just like that, right? And now with internet, right, it's nothing of the kind, right? And so, especially with how the pandemic has really moved things, away from the real world, right, and into the internet space a lot more, right? It really gives you know um basically the day-to-day lives, people particularly living in North America, for example, a lot of trouble, where you were able to basically correspond your activity on the internet with your day life, right? Going around, um, just traveling around where you live, right? And now that's very much more difficult, right? Because again, with a lot of these people that they took off, right, because they didn't archive their material, right, back up their material, and they didn't really make an attempt to expand their reach through building separate platforms outside of these tech giant platforms, right? You know, basically where they were giving inspiration to people and encouragement to people, where okay, this guy's pretty good. He has like 150,000 followers, right? But I think I can do it one step better, right? And basically following them was giving you encouragement to continue on that path, right? And that was basically the whole plan, right? Was basically where they're realizing that they're losing their political influence, and so as a result, and this episode is not about politics. This is just basically the sort of aftermath of doing something like this. So, but yeah, right, where they're basically losing their political influence, right? And they're realizing that basically the only way to put a stop to it is basically by not allowing people to have their material, especially when the platforms are supposed to be acting as a public utility, right? And you're basically telling people that they're banned, right? It's like telling people they're banned from using the sidewalk, literally, right? um that's literally in effect how egregious of a crime this was, right? Not to point fingers though, right? But um that's essentially the characteristics of the internet dark age, right? Is essentially that um it basically made using the internet a lot more difficult, right? And it also spawned um what I refer to as the internet bully, right? To such an extent where it really needs to be characterized and distilled down, right? Which I'm going to try to attempt to do throughout this episode, and then throughout the next set of episodes that I'm gonna be doing, really unpacking this, right? And it'll take as long as it takes. So um and so you know I'm just gonna take a break there, right? Um and sort of do a little bit of housekeeping, right? So I've been wanting to you know do a lot of stuff here, right? Just gonna open a bunch of stuff here. Now transition. Yeah, so I've been wanting to do a lot of stuff here. Um, I did deck profile teaser. I want to do a couple deck profiles, but again, I want to sort of upsize the amount of product that I'm receiving from Pokemon, and so I'm just taking care of that before I deal with that. Um, Before I start to put that together, and start planning on doing it and stuff like that. Um, And I think for the last couple episodes, I've been talking about how I want to do a lot more outreach where um, I'm doing something, for example, like a mailing list, right, where I'm keeping people up to date. Um, and also probably doing some social media outreach too, right, on platforms like Twitch, for example. And so, um, you know, these are things that I just have to get put on the back burner because these are things require resources, right? And I talked about I think in on episode 21 about how or I think it was episode 22 how I wanted to basically put the show on hiatus, right? Um, until I upgrade my technology. Um, but I just decided that the interest of continuity of the show, right? And with how spontaneous game culture is, right? Um, I don't want to necessarily put the show on hiatus until, um, you know, um, I feel like my ducks in a row where I can just step away and do a lot more work in different aspects, right? Um, and so um, yeah, these are things that require resources, right? So um, you know, again, I haven't opened up channels for that yet, and we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. And so we try to be extra careful, right? With pace, right? Um, and so I think I'm just going to kind of just keep hinting at it, right? To keep people on track, right? But again, right, these are things that are not necessarily going to happen by themselves, right? So yeah, uh, that's housekeeping. So I want to talk about what I refer to, right? Which is this concept of internet bully, right? Where essentially with how powerful technology we've been gifted, right? Um, you know, has given people the capacity to really blindside people, right? From all walks of life, right? In all different sorts of ways, right? Um, and I just refer to this as the internet bully, right? Again, when the internet was really in its infancy, the term that we used is troll, right? Internet troll, right? And then you have shows like South Park, which popularized terms like internet bullshit artists, right? And they have all sorts of colorful phrases for, the archetypal, what I refer to as internet bully, right? And so, you have these issues where essentially, right, with just how easy people are able to satisfy, very sick fantasies, quite frankly, right? Through things like niche games, niche shows, right? And then also just very sick perversions, right? And then basically with just how accessible the internet is, right? You really don't have any psychic shielding, right? Um, or any buffer of any kind against anything, right? And so you really have to exercise discernment, right? Like with nothing else, right? That you encounter with your day to day activities, right? Then on the internet, right? And so um giving people the capacity to really, you know, um, what I'm going to describe as inheriting the characteristics of, for example, something like, um, a society superior, right? Um, like a Supreme Court judge, for example, right? Um, and through what's known as ontological relativism, really put out very hateful rhetoric, right? And dialogue, right? Um, to really drive a wedge in society, right? I'm gonna try to sort of detail that with a text software here. So what I'm really talking about here is you know that comes up nice here. Right, transition. And I'll try to format this here so that it comes up nice. I think I just have to probably bring up a couple. Just do that. Let's do this. Talk each other. Yeah. So this one, read, rest. Yeah. Right, transition. And I'll do a third one. And down and transition. There we go. So there we go. All right. So that's what I'm talking about here. All right. So it's the sort of thesis of what I'm going to be unpacking for these next few episodes. Right. So just use that as reference. If you ever get lost when I'm sort of unpacking a lot of stuff, right? I'm going to be taking apart for the next few episodes, right? So this is very sort of very not necessarily complicated, but it's a very advanced dynamic to really unpack, right? And so I don't want to sort of information overload people. So I'll just leave that for your consideration, and I'll close it up for this episode. So um, just to conclude, right? That's definitely going to be sort of the theme for these next few episodes, right? It's just going to take as long as it takes, right? You know, um, again, we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, and so I want to sort of start doing a lot of more in-depth series, right? As opposed to some of the series I've been doing, which have been pretty introductory for at best, right? So look forward to that. So it's a reminder, gamer culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.